My brothers and sisters in Christ, today in our progressive reading of the letter to the Hebrews, we move into chapter 3. There's a few verses skipped from the end of what we heard yesterday, and I'll comment on that context here in a moment. But if you may recall yesterday, I shared how the letter to the Hebrews, actually over the last 2 days, is really building on the image of the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, as opposed to a very prominent New Testament image is always of the new Exodus. It's a focus on Moses, Jesus fulfilling the law in this way, and the people, just as the Israelites were led out of Egypt into freedom and into the desert and then into the promised land, so we are being led through baptism into a new Exodus. We're progressing towards the ultimate promised land, which is heaven. And so this is perhaps one of the most prominent images for where we are as Christians in the New Testament. But Hebrews is, in a lot of places, when focusing on the priesthood of Jesus, is focusing on the sacrificial sense of atonement. However, we get the exception of that today, and that's what we want to turn to. In chapter 3, in the verses preceding what we hear today, there's a comparison between Jesus and Moses to show how Jesus is not just another Moses, but how much greater than Moses he is. So if we can look at the mighty things Moses did, all the more so what Jesus does for us, is what the argument is making. So that sets up what we hear today, not just in the first reading, but in the psalm. The psalm today is Psalm 95, which is a very important psalm historically, the understanding of the people of Israel, and in Christian prayer itself. And so what we hear in Psalm 95, part of it actually gets quoted in the first reading as well, as we get a kind of midrash on a Hebrew teaching on part of this psalm. And so in Psalm 95, the theme is that of the behavior of the people of Israel in the desert after the Exodus, that they're delivered from the hands of the Egyptians, they pass through the Red Sea into the desert. God provides for his people, but ultimately they grumble. And that is what defines the 40 years in the desert, is it seems no matter what God miraculously does for his people, they end up grumbling against him again. Their hearts are hardened into sin. And so Psalm 95 is praying against this hardness of heart, and warning not to be like the Israelites in the desert. So the letter to the Hebrews is calling into mind this exhortation to ward off or guard against hardness of heart. And in yesterday's reading, we saw that the nature of sin was described that because of our fear of death, we fall into sin, our fragility, our finitude, if you will. And in this, we'll find that we can constantly encounter our own insufficiency, our own lack. And we have two choices when that happens. We can either turn to God to supply, we can allow God to be our strength, or we can focus on the lack, the opposite of gratitude, and we can grumble. We can seek to just control our own outcomes, to protect ourselves, to provide for ourselves in every way. And in this, our hearts harden. And so, as the first reading says after its quotation of Psalm 95, that we need to guard every day through our prayer. We need to pay attention every day to pray in gratitude to God. Now, the celebration of the Eucharist, if you have the chance to go to daily Mass, is the ultimate daily celebration of Thanksgiving. But we need to live lives of intentional gratitude every day to pay attention to what God is doing and to respond in thanksgiving, while also offering him our needs. Otherwise, we lose track of all that God does for us, and we pay attention only to our own perceived lack, to what isn't the way we think it should be, and our hearts will harden, and we will live a life of grumbling, as the Israelites did in the desert. No matter how many miracles God performed for them, they still questioned him and grumbled. May we not be like the Israelites, but instead recognize that Jesus is greater than Moses. He has not led us into freedom from a nation or an oppressor, but led us into freedom from sin and death. May we not throw away such a wonderful gift as he leads us to heaven by our own petty grumbling. May we instead respond to him in gratitude today and pray that we can do so each and every day until we finally arrive in the promised land, now and forever. May God bless you all.